All right. Put your hands together. MC Soul, DJ Pain One. And they'll be continuing to perform throughout the night, too. My name is Alona Minkowski. I'm going to be your host this evening. And thank you all very much for coming out. Of course, we are here for the book launch for the Assassination Complex. An incredibly important piece of work. That's right. I mean, it is incredibly important work when you think of the precedent that the U.S. government is setting with these policies of targeted assassination, of terrorist watch lists, and really violating people's civil liberties. And so that's why it's so important that we do see this kind of work and really acknowledge those policies, because for the most part they are happening in secret and under the veil of secrecy. And so I think that when people are uninformed, then they can't necessarily push back. When they are far removed from these types of policies, they become desensitized. And then, you know, things like drone strikes and targeted assassinations, or targeted killings as the government likes to call them, become the butt of jokes. I don't know if any of you watched some of the speeches at the White House Correspondents' Dinner given by the president and Larry Wilmore this past weekend, but, you know, they make jokes about raining down bombs on people. And so that's why it's so important that this work is really out there. So that's one thing I'd like to say. Also, it's so important that we have these journalists, the staff at The Intercept, that are doing what they do, because increasingly doing national security reporting is a job that puts journalists at risk. And that's because of very aggressive policies by the government, a blurring of the lines where really the First Amendment and the freedom of speech should be very clear. And it's a rarity. I was in Washington, D.C. this weekend, surrounding the events for the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and it's definitely not the same group of people that you see there whining and dining with people in power that you do see here with the staff of the journalists, with the staff of The Intercept here in Brooklyn. A little bit of a different scene. We can definitely say that. I didn't get invited to the event. Steve Aoki and DJ Khaled were more important, I guess, than me to put me at the Huffington Post table. But so thank you to them. I'm fortunate enough to call these people my friends, but also inspirations as journalists. And the last thing that I'll say is that, you know, with, unlike Edward Snowden and the NSA documents, with the drone papers, the general public may not know who the source is, but the fact that there even is a source already tells you that transparency is contagious, right? And that whistleblowers, people who want to expose wrongdoing, are not being scared away from doing so, but inspired. So without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. There will be a lot of speakers tonight, so please stay with us through the whole program. And the editor-in-chief of The Intercept, everyone, Betsy Reed.
Hi. So this book had its origins in a series that we did in The Intercept last fall called The Drone Papers. And that series was the product of a tremendous and, you know, long-term effort by practically the whole organization. And, you know, it's about, at the heart of it, are a series of secret documents that were shared with Jeremy Scahill by a whistleblower. This is someone in the intelligence community who was so heavily weighed on his conscience that the outrage of what was going on in this world in secret, the fact that we have a government that is carrying out assassinations with no transparency, no trial, was you know, enough to motivate this individual to take huge personal risks to bring this to Jeremy. And I want to say something about the number of people who were involved at The Intercept. It was a massive group effort. Involved, you know, this whole list of people here, and you know, we really brought to bear a whole range of skills, multimedia. I will mention one person by name who's also responsible for what you're seeing on the screen tonight is Josh Begley. who's just done fantastic work. But you know, it really, and we are grateful for the opportunity that we have at The Intercept to pursue this kind of original journalism that is so hard in this day and age. We work digitally, so it's really exciting to actually have a permanent artifact that you can share and read. And that, you know, I mean, since you're here tonight, it's clear that you're motivated and you care, and you actually regard this these revelations as serious and important. But, you know, as we can see just in the landscape, the political landscape today, that's not a widely shared view. And so just thank you for coming out, and I hope that you read the book and share it and carry on. Thanks.
Sorry. Had to take a sip of my beer. Sorry, I'm late. Okay, so Betsy Reed, everyone. And yes, give her another round of applause, please. And then coming up next, I'd like to introduce Peter Sarsgaard. I'm sure you know his work, are big fans of it. He's going to read an excerpt from the book. Thanks, Peter.
I think I got one here. Right?
Okay.
Hello, hello? Yeah. All right. Listen. You have to remind people, I have kids. I start off every story like that. Listen. Why I leaked the watch list documents. The following statement was provided by the source who leaked the March 2013 watch listing guidance. Over the past few years, we've heard a lot about President Obama's secret kill list, yet we still know virtually nothing about its implementation. Despite mild congressional scrutiny and ACLU lawsuits directed at the shroud of secrecy, some basic questions remain unanswered. How do you get on this list? Am I on the list? Who put me on the list? How do you get off the list? Can you get off the list? The truth is, there are several such lists used to target individuals for different reasons. Some lists are closely kept, others span multiple intelligence and local law enforcement agencies. There are lists used to kill or capture supposed high-value targets, and others are intended to threaten, coerce, or simply monitor a person's activity. However, all the lists, whether to kill or silence, originate from the terrorist identities data mart environment, and they are maintained by the Terrorist Screening Center at the National Counterterrorism Center. The existence of TIDE is unclassified, yet details about how it functions in our government are completely unknown to the public. In August 2013, the database reached a milestone of 1 million entries. Today, it is thousands of entries larger and is growing faster than it has since its inception in 2003. The March 2013 watch listing guidance lays out the broad criteria for nominating someone to the database. Okay? Not only does Terrorist Screening Center reserve the right to store your name, date of birth, and other basic identifying information, but it also stores your medical records, transcripts, and passport data, your license plate numbers, email, and cell phone number, along with the cell phone's international mobile subscriber identity and international mobile station equipment identity numbers, your bank account numbers and purchases, and other sensitive information, including DNA and photographs capable of identifying you and using facial recognition software. Whew. The National Counterterrorism Center collaborates annually with agencies from the international alliance known as Five Eyes to supplement any information missing from entries already in its database or to add more entries. Individual entries in the database are assigned a tied personal number, or TPN. from Osama bin Laden, TPN, it's a long number here, to Awlaki, TPN, long number, the American son of Anwar al-Awlaki. Anyone who has ever been the target of a covert operation was first assigned a TPN and closely monitored by all agencies who followed that TPN long before they were eventually put on a separate list and extrajudicially sentenced to death. When governments begin to tally enormous enemies lists, they run roughshod over our essential checks on power, especially when they consider their own citizens to be a threat. Of the more than 1 million entries in the Tide database, approximately 21,000 are those of American citizens. By leaking this information, which is unclassified, but by reverse logic considered too sensitive to be released, I hope to give the public an opportunity to know what kind of activity might lead to their being placed on a list used to monitor their everyday activity. For the first time, the public has an opportunity to gain insight into the criteria that could potentially lead to their own trial by drone strike. In 2008, I shook hands with Senator Obama when he came through my town on his way to the White House. After his inauguration, he said, "Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency." I firmly believe those principles are crucial to an open society, which is why I was compelled to reveal this information. If this administration lacks the courage to uphold its promises to the people, then I and others like me will do so for them. Amen.
Thank you, Peter. I hate to say it, but I can't imagine that a President Hillary Clinton or President Donald Trump would make things any better. So, again, let's just, take stock of that, and the fact that this happened under the Obama administration's watch. Now I would like to introduce 3 people, all incredible in the work that they do. Hina Shamsi, she's the director of the National Security Project at the ACLU. And Ryan Devereaux and Cora Courier, both reporters, writers at The Intercept who focus on national security issues and human rights. So let me just welcome them all up here.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Ben. I want to begin by thanking the staff of The Intercept, you guys, everyone else, as well as your source, for the tremendous public service that you have done by shining much-needed light on an area in which there has been far too much secrecy. I think about what your source said in his essay about what President Obama had said earlier, and I counter that with transparency and accountability are hallmarks of the rule of law. Yet with respect to tremendously consequential programs and policies that have a huge impact on the civil and human rights of citizens and non-citizens alike, from the no-fly list to the selectee list to kill lists, we have lacked both transparency and accountability. And this is something that the ACLU has worked on for years now, starting in the Bush administration, into the Obama administration, and we expect into whichever administration comes next. So with that, though, I wanted to talk a little bit about the specific revelations that you and your source have been able to provide the public in the book and through the drone papers. Ryan, I wanted to begin by asking you about the first article in the book, which is by you and Jeremy, and it's called Death and the Watch List, and ask you about the revelations in that piece.
Yeah, so thank you so much for all the kind words. So it's really the compilation of a couple of different stories that Jeremy and I did, which were about the watch listing complex. So the no-fly list and the selectee list, which is this list that you can get on that triggers, enhanced screening at airports and that sort of thing. And what we published was the sort of rule book that exists to govern these kinds of watch listing processes. And it's a sort of rule book that people have fought to get in courts for years and years and years, and it finally appeared before us. And once we started digging into it, you really saw a system that was so elastic that the rules could in many cases be meaningless. You could bend them to be whatever you wanted them to be. And it created a system that became bloated and overloaded, and still that way today, which raises all kinds of serious questions about how effective it actually is, and whether this is a real deterrent to terrorism, or whether we're just building something to make ourselves feel more comfortable. I think that was the guidance itself, the rule book, being able to see how these things were actually managed was it was amazing for us, but I really do think it's been helpful, to the public and in court cases that you guys have been fighting for years. So that's what it was. So what the watch listing stuff sort of is the groundwork for a lot of other lists, and the source sort of talks about in the essay. And Cora will be able to speak to this more on some of the stuff that she worked on, and it builds to other lists that have consequences that go beyond not being able to get on an airplane or getting hassled at the airport, or are much more serious.
Just one thing that I wanted to highlight about the guidance and what it shows and the importance of what your source provided is just how perilous an endeavor this country has embarked on when it seeks to blacklist people and prevent them from doing something that is as necessary to personal and professional lives as flying, based on a future prediction of harm that they have not committed. How do you prove yourself innocent of something that you have not done? That's one of the things that we're trying to litigate in court now, so thank you for that. Cora, I wanted to turn to you and your series of articles and work on the kill chain. Information that you've provided and written about based on materials about the kill list and how it's more broadly applied.
Thank you. So I worked on 2 articles that are featured in the book from the drone papers. One of the documents that we received was an internal Pentagon study evaluating the military's drone program. It's targeted killing program, really. It's not just drones. It's program again to target alleged Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab members in Yemen and Somalia. And this was an internal Pentagon look at its own study, so they're evaluating it on their own terms. And one of the revelations from the study was simply just a map of the footprint of the U.S. of Africa, where the drones are flown from, where the manned planes are flown from, the infrastructure in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Djibouti, above all, that's used to support flights of drones and other planes over Yemen and Somalia. And a second thing that was notable in the strike was the administration talks about these strikes being against people who pose an imminent threat to the United States. But this document showed that showed the process by which the president approves people for targeting with lethal strikes. And once they're approved by the president, there's then a 60-day window that the military has to target them. So that's a 60-day definition of imminence, which is, not the common sense one. And another thing that was revelatory about these documents was the administration has also said that they have a preference for capturing rather than killing terrorists. But the documents contain quite a lot of data showing that captures were basically non-existent. And when they did happen, they were reliant on other governments, probably in this case the Yemeni government, to carry them out, which raises a whole host of other issues about human rights and potential abuses. And I think finally the most damning thing about this study was it was the Pentagon's own admission, pretty blunt admission, that of the technological limitations of even the drone program. So you hear a lot about drones as these perfect precision weapons, but this study laid out in a lot of detail the problems that they had with getting what's called PID, or positive identification of the targets, that they lacked the resources and the technological capacity to always know who they were targeting. And that, I think, the study also said that there were, at any given time, like something like 20 people on this high value list, and yet we know that over just 2 years, in 2011, 2012, there were more than 50 strikes in Yemen and Somalia, some 300 people killed, at least 50 of them civilians, and so these strikes are killing a lot more than the so-called high-value targets who pose an imminent threat to the United States.
One of the things that's so important about what you've written about and further revealed details about is that these are strikes being carried out in countries in which and with which we are not at war. This expansion of this notion of a global war paradigm without territorial or temporal limits. Which is a very dangerous one, and we can think about how dangerous that is when we think about who the next president might be, even if we're inclined to trust President Obama with respect to these decisions. Who will the next president be who claims the same authority? But even with respect to the use of drones and killing authority within traditional actual battlefields, you worked, Ryan, on an article that talked about Operation Haymaker. And if you could talk a little bit about what that revealed.
Yeah. So the story that I worked on for the drone papers was, this is one of the documents from a Manhunting Basics. It's about a campaign in northeastern Afghanistan that stretched for a number of months in 2012 into 2013. And it was a targeted killing campaign aimed at wiping out the Al-Qaeda and Taliban remnants in the Hindu Kush. And what the documents revealed here is that in about 9 out of 10 of these kinetic operations, so not raids on the ground, but actual airstrikes, they weren't killing the person that they were going after. They were killing other people. We don't know who they are, but they get labeled as EKIA, enemy killed in action. And so that sort of statistic, the 9 out of 10 statistic, generated a lot of attention because it's quite alarming. But there's another element to this campaign that I found after spending weeks and weeks, months and months looking at these documents that was really revealing, is that the Americans had gone in there with this idea that they were going to retake this province and they were going to do it through picking off these high-value targets. And at the end of the day, according to their own estimates, they really failed at this. And I talked to a lot of people who spent time in Kunar and Nuristan, working on campaigns, conventional sort of military campaigns, working as researchers. And the thing is, the Americans went into this part of Afghanistan not knowing what they were doing, not knowing anything about the people that lived there, not knowing anything about the history there, and they ended up getting duped by local gangsters. And this province became this microcosm of the way that the war in Afghanistan has unfolded over the last decade and a half. And this campaign to me became really sort of symbolic of this sort of convenient way in which this country has gone about war post 9/11, or the seemingly convenient way that in the end doesn't really get us to where we want to be at all and has tremendous tolls. I mean, I think that Haymaker is a really illustrative sort of example to look at when we think about going forward, when we think about who's going to be sitting in the White House, in a year. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think, part of this story is a continuing one. What you have is, despite repeated promises of transparency and accountability, repeated failures in official transparency and official accountability. So we still don't know the names, numbers, status of people who've been killed in drone strikes outside of actual battlefields, acknowledged as such officially, except for a handful of Western victims. And that is a shameful record. We are not, as a public, able to have the kind of meaningful debate that we need to about standards, about strategy, consequences, limitations, rule of law, without official information. And in that space comes the necessity of the kind of information that your source and you all have provided. Again, for that I'm grateful. We expect a little bit more transparency. We'll see how much comes in an ACLU lawsuit where in the next month to 6 weeks, the administration has said it is going to provide its presidential policy guidance, the so-called playbook for the rules applied to so-called targeted killings outside of hostile environments or active battlefields. Am I optimistic about how much will be redacted or unredacted? Well, long experience here. But I think it's especially important in the last period of President Obama's legacy to push for meaningful transparency, to push for actual accountability and limitations, both with respect to law and policy, because whatever this administration is doing now, worse could come with the next one. So, thank you all.
All right. Hannah, Cora, and Ryan, thank you all very much. And incredibly important words here, right? Just about the dehumanizing effect here. You see words like EKIA. What does that even mean? These are human beings we're talking about. And I just want to say also, MC Soul and DJ Payne 1 are about to perform a few more songs for us before we continue on with more speakers. But don't forget that the books, the Assassination Complex books, are out in the back if you want to purchase them. There are also a limited amount of the Intercept t-shirts. So get them if you want. And yeah, there will be a book signing later, but if you want to have to avoid the line and already have your book, then maybe you can pop out and do that quickly. And just a reminder too, the books have been subsidized, so they're only $20, and all of the proceeds from this are going to go to the Intercept and the work that the staff there does to continue to fund this kind of journalism. So thanks, guys.
This song is called I Think I'm Emma Goldman. Anybody in here know who Emma Goldman is? Any Emma Goldman fans? Hey, this is an amazing event. Give it up for the Intercept crew. This is amazing. Emma Goldman, I think I'm Emma Goldman. Used to rock for Karl Marx. Then I met Emma Goldman. Homie Robbie Super put me up on game. I know what communism always fails. Power-hungry communists, as dangerous as a blood-sucking capitalist. From Gulag to the prison industrial complex. To each his own, no thrones, no preachers spreading fantasies. God is a myth, man's enslavement is his reality. God don't like ugly, God hates flags, God hates cops, is a mesmer of a sociopath. I don't need that bullshit to act ethically. All I need is a library card, knowledge that no one is above me. Next time you fucking use a birth control pill, thank Emma and the IWW for 8-hour work days and general strikes. We have the commons, private properties, the system is to alienate people from their needs. While poverty's pandemic and capitalism can't eliminate crime. Emma Goldman, I know I'm no Emma Goldman. She opened up an ice cream shop to fund an assassin, that's gangster. Welcome to the new Black Scare. They say it can't work. All we do is put in work. Not for the money, out of necessity. Imagine a world you could follow your passion, a federation, your own community. Shouts to Occupy Sandy, stepping in with mutual aid. Find out you weren't anarchists if it took the time to read. Academics, debate tactics. We shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, planting gardens in the projects. We take the streets, we strike that. Break the gut phenomena, do the opposite. We can bicker over differences, or we can fuck up shit, cause shit's fucked up. Bullshit. In the 1800s, anarchists were libertines. Only in America, a libertarian's an arm of the right wing. Put a gun in your face, tell you to be non-violent. Ignorance is violence. Who spreads ignorance through public school? Send the poor to die overseas to steal more shit for you know who. If voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal. She said that 100 years ago. Ain't shit changed, but the manufacturers of weapons. Ain't shit changed. Play treasure with banks and mainstream news. Government was designed to overrule the mob. So we mobs designed to overrule the government. Emma Goldman must be Emma Goldman in the belly of the beast. Make that motherfucker sick. Emma Goldman must be Emma Goldman, must be doing something wrong if the feds ain't on my dick. All right, hey. Thank you. It's like, I'm just like, is this really gonna be on C-SPAN, all my cussing? This next song is about Google. I don't know if y'all know about Google, but you know, I wish I didn't use their products, but it is what it is.
Motherfuck Google.
How y'all doing? Are y'all still with us tonight?
Motherfuck Google.
If you can guess the chorus,
Motherfuck Google.
sing it with us.
Motherfuck Google.
Motherfuck Google. They colonized the internet, gave us free shit. We were the motherfucking products, not just a monopoly. It's bigger than a country. Something like a modern version of the Dutch East India Trading Company. Like a drug dealer. They want to sell you some crack. Next thing you're hooked. They're selling more than your ass. Every click, everything you read, everything you type, terms of service, you didn't even read. It's not a search engine or an advertising agency. They put toys in a cell, analyze you like a rat in a laboratory. I hate Facebook. I think it's the devil. But Google's a megalomaniac on a whole nother level. They bought Boston Dynamics, going big on robots, fucking with Blackwater, military entertainment complex. Then they bought DeepMind, a sophisticated AI. Why these motherfuckers need to do facial recognition in real time? What's up with the Pentagon and the NSA? We're never gonna know. That shit's classified. Don't take a super genius to read the writing on the wall. They wanna rule the world. They colonized us all. What is it?
Motherfuck Google.
What?
Motherfuck Google.
Brooklyn, I can't hear you.
Motherfuck Google.
Sing it.
Motherfuck Google.
Do no evil is your motto. You didn't say Nathan. When those pigs in the sky turn job into a data mining operation. Ray Kurzweil misses his daddy. He wants to bring him back. Google immortality. What kind of life is that? Fuck off with your Google Plus. Nobody wants that shit. Hats off to y'all moving that crap from motherfucking search results. In Google Glass, merging us with mech. Everything you see and feel is mined and sold and catered and pimped. Postmodern kingdom, you build as you breathe. Automate the labor, let the humans be free. They built a new caste system. We are at the bottom, the housing crash. A bad algorithm. Jones in the field, who's responsible for war crimes? The pilot or the president or the programmer that created his mind? They bought Nest Labs and them intelligent thermostats, but it ain't about temperature. They want to learn your behavior. In the wake of Occupy Oakland, they offered to build with the city a trans-opticom that can link your license plate to your online identity. Not living like slaves, more like serfs to the tower. If corporations are people, no motherfucker should have all that power. Self-driving cars, Google Play, owns $7 billion in housing bonds, $3 billion in public utilities. Look at Detroit, now look at the world. You ain't gotta be an astrophysicist to see it.
Motherfuck Google. Motherfuck Google.
Motherfuck Google. What?
Motherfuck Google.
Brooklyn, let me hear it.
Motherfuck Google.
We out of here, thank you.
All right, all right, all right, all right. MC Soul, DJ Payne 1. Hope everyone's getting their books. Give them a round of applause. And now for another reading, Peter Sarsgaard is coming back, and this time he'll be reading an excerpt of the essay by Edward Snowden that's featured in the book.
So I've cut down this bit a little bit. You're all going to have to buy the book and read it for yourselves. I was going to read the whole thing, but one thing I wanted to say is when I was a kid living in Oklahoma City, every morning we did, okay, so it's better than okay. We did the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, blindly, you know. We'd get up there. But, you know, it got into me. And I really considered myself not just a patriot, but like somebody who really believed in the United States as the greatest country in the world. I really, really, really felt it in my heart. And as I became an adult, it was disappointment after disappointment. But of course, that's what it means to grow up. If the United States are your parents, when you're a kid, they're your parents. You believe what they say, you love them, you follow them, they say do this, do that, you do it. And then as you grow up, you get a mind of your own. So, yeah. So, the biggest adult among us here, Edward Snowden. Elected by circumstance, Edward Snowden. I've been waiting 40 years for someone like you. Those were the first words Daniel Ellsberg spoke to me when we met last year. Dan and I felt an intimate kinship. We both knew what it meant to risk so much and to be irrevocably changed by revealing secret truths. One of the challenges of being a whistleblower is living with the knowledge that people continue to sit, just as you did, at those desks in that unit throughout the agency who see what you saw and comply in silence without resistance or complaint. They learn to live not just with the untruths, but with the unnecessary untruths, the dangerous untruths, corrosive untruths. It is a double tragedy. What begins as a survival strategy ends with the compromise of a human being it sought to preserve, and the diminishing of the democracy meant to justify the sacrifice. But unlike Daniel Ellsberg, I did not have to wait 40 years to witness other citizens breaking that silence with documents. Ellsberg gave us the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and other newspapers in 1971. Chelsea Manning provided the Iraq and Afghan war logs. You can clap. And the Cablegate materials to WikiLeaks in 2010. I came forward in 2013. Now here we are in 2015, and another person of courage and conscience has made available the set of extraordinary documents that are published here. We are witnessing a compression of the working period in which bad policy shelters in the shadows, the time frame in which unconventional activities can continue before they are exposed by acts of conscience. And this temporal compression has a significance beyond the immediate headlines. It permits people of this country to learn about critical government actions, not as part of the historical record, but in a way that allows direct action through voting. In other words, in a way that empowers an informed citizenry to defend the democracy that state secrets are nominally intended to support. When I see individuals who are able to bring information forward, it gives me hope that we won't always be required to curtail the illegal activities of our government as if it were a constant task to uproot official law-breaking as routinely as we mow the grass. Interestingly enough, that is how some have begun to describe remote killing operations, as cutting the grass. A single act of whistleblowing doesn't change the reality that there are significant portions of the government that operate below the waterline, beneath the visibility of the public. Those secret activities will continue despite reforms. But those who perform these actions now have to live with the fear that if they engage in activities contrary to the spirit of society, if even a single citizen is catalyzed to halt the machinery of that injustice, they might still be held to account. The thread by which good governance hangs is this equality before the law. For the only fear of the man who turns the gears is that he may find himself upon them. Hope lies beyond when we move from extraordinary acts of revelation to a collective culture of accountability, all of us, right? a collective culture of accountability within the intelligence community. Here we will have taken a meaningful step toward solving a problem that has existed for as long as our government. Not all leaks are alike, nor are their makers. General David Petraeus, for instance, provided the illicit lover and favorable biographer information so secret it defied classification, including the names of covert operatives and the president's private thoughts on matters of strategic concern. Petraeus was not charged with a felony. As the Justice Department, yeah, let it out. Yeah. As the Justice Department had initially recommended, but was instead permitted to plead guilty to a misdemeanor. He had enlisted soldier of modest rank. He had an enlisted soldier of modest rank pulled out a stack of highly classified notebooks and handed them to his girlfriend to secure so much as a smile. He'd be looking at many decades in prison, not a pile of character references from a who's who of the deep state. There are authorized leaks and also permitted disclosures. It is rare for senior administration officials to explicitly ask a subordinate to leak a CIA officer's name to retaliate against her husband, as appears to have been the case with Valerie Plame. It is equally rare for a month to go by in which some senior official does not disclose some protected information that is beneficial to the political efforts of the parties, right? But clearly damaging to national security under the definitions of our law. Now I'm going to skip, but you guys, some good stuff in here. I want to believe that that when we hear this, that everyone in this room feels proud that this man's an American, right? At the heart of this evolution is that whistleblowing is a radicalizing event. And by radical, I don't mean extreme. I mean it in the traditional sense of radix, the root of the issue. At some point, you recognize that you can't just move a few letters around on a page and hope for the best. You can't simply report this problem to your supervisor, as I tried to, because inevitably, supervisors get nervous. They think about the structural risk to their career. They're concerned about rocking the boat and getting a reputation. The incentives aren't there to produce meaningful reform. Fundamentally, in an open society, change has to flow from the bottom to the top. I feel like we're all the bottom. I know I'm the bottom. As someone who... As someone who works in the intelligence community, you've given up a lot to do this work. You've happily committed yourself to tyrannical restrictions. You voluntarily undergo polygraphs. You tell the government everything about your life. You waive a lot of rights because you believe the fundamental goodness of your mission justifies the sacrifice of even the sacred. It's a just cause. This guy is such a patriot. I can't, it's like more than I am. And when you're confronted with evidence, not in an edge case, not in a peculiarity, but as a core consequence of the program, that the government is subverting the Constitution and violating the ideals you so fervently believe in, you have to make a decision. When you see that the program or policy is inconsistent with the oaths and obligations that you've sworn to your society and yourself, then that oath and that obligation cannot be reconciled with the program. To which do we owe a greater loyalty? Now, I'm going to go to the end. Here we see the double edge of our uniquely American brand of nationalism. We are raised to be exceptionalists, to think we are the better nation with the manifest destiny to rule. The danger is that some people will eventually believe this claim, and some will expect the manifestation of our national identity, that is, our government, to comport itself accordingly. Unrestrained power may be many things, but it is not American. It is, in this sense, that the act of whistleblowing increasingly has become an act of political resistance. The whistleblower raises the alarm and lifts the lamp, inheriting the legacy of a line of Americans that begins with Paul Revere. The individuals who make these disclosures feel so strongly about what they've seen that they are willing to risk their lives and their freedom. They know that we, the people, are ultimately the strongest and most reliable check on the power of the government. The insiders at the highest levels of government have extraordinary capability, extraordinary resources, tremendous access to influence, and a monopoly on violence. But in the final calculus, there is but one figure that matters: the individual citizen, and there are more of us than there are of them. You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That was incredible. And you know, amazing to hear Edward Snowden's words too, because as I was saying before, the courage that it takes to be a whistleblower is contagious, and you can see that he was inspired by others, that he has inspired others, and not surprisingly, those people in power either think that their buddies should get off the hook if they do the same thing, or the people like Edward Snowden are traitors and should be killed, which, yes, some high-ranking officials like Michael Hayden have actually said. So just to give you a little update on what's going to happen, coming up next, we have one more speaker who I'll introduce in a minute, but then we'll have another performance by MC Soul and DJ Payne 1. Then Jeremy will speak, then the book signing will begin. So just to kind of keep you guys up to date here. And so now let me please introduce, joining us from far away, an incredible journalist, Mr. Glenn Greenwald, who is a co-founder of The Intercept, author of No Place to Hide.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me okay? All right, good. So thank you so much for coming out tonight, and I'm sorry that my scheduling issues prevented me from being with you in person, and I'm also really sorry for the weird, creepy 1960s curtains that are behind me. I actually, when I turned on the video and I saw them, I'm in this hotel to do this event, and I saw them, I felt like I'm some sort of contestant, like from the dating game or something. But, you know, I was worried about it a little bit, and then right before I came on, I saw a Twitter posting from one of you in the audience who reported, and I'm quoting, quote, "People lighting up joints at the Jeremy Scahill and Glenn Greenwald talk like it's a gig." So I quickly realized, I was like, you know, a lot of people in the audience, probably most, are going to be totally fine with whatever curtains are behind me, which is really comforting. So one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this event and the release of the book and the reporting that The Intercept, as led by Jeremy, was able to do on this story is because it's really a vivid expression of the vision that we had when we started the Intercept. We didn't have every single detail nailed down about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it, as you might have heard. But we definitely had some really clear core principles about what we wanted to achieve. And one of the most important principles was that we wanted to create an environment using every conceivable resource, technology, expertise, resources, in order to create a really safe and secure way that sources, people who wanted to be courageous whistleblowers, could come and speak to us and provide information to the public through us in as safe and secure a manner as possible. There was a lot of focus during the Snowden debate over the effect that the surveillance state has on the right to privacy and the way that surveillance invades the right to privacy and violates it and erodes it. And there was some discussion and debate about the way that the surveillance state erodes free expression and free speech, all of which is true. But there was not very much attention paid to one of the greatest dangers and the greatest harms of a surveillance state, which is the way in which surveillance, mass ubiquitous surveillance, erodes the right of a free press. Because if you think about it, in order for us to do our jobs as journalists, and our job as journalists is to shine a light on what the most powerful people are doing in the dark that they want to keep from the public. In order for us to be able to do that, we need to have people who have access to that information, who know about what's going on, and who want to reveal it. And if the government is able to monitor everybody's communication activity and know everyone who's talking to everybody else, it becomes extremely difficult, virtually impossible, for journalists to cultivate sources and therefore for a free press to exist in any way other than an illusory way that's guaranteed on paper. And when you combine that with what has been this incredibly vindictive mentality on the part of the US government in the last 7 years to prosecute and persecute people who in good conscience expose what never should have been kept secret in the first place, you can really have a virtually complete erosion of a free press. And so part of what we wanted to do was to find a way to devote the resources that are needed to compete with the US government, to countervail and counteract their efforts to know what everyone's saying and with whom everybody's speaking, to create a technological and a human wall that would enable sources to come to media outlets like us and journalists like Jeremy and be able to provide information that the public should have had all along. And so being able to do this story in that way was a really gratifying fulfillment of that vision that we think is just the first step to continuing to fortify that environment and to have other sources be able to come to us for similarly consequential stories. And then the other way in which this was a fulfillment of this vision that we had when we created The Intercept was we wanted to make sure that once sources did come to us, that we were institutionally constituted from the beginning, never to hesitate about publishing stories like this because of fear of consequences or judgment or scorn from government officials and their loyalists in the media. And it was really fulfilling and gratifying to see from the very beginning that we got this story, our entire team led by our editor-in-chief, Betsy Reed, and our lawyers and our editors never blinked. There was never a moment of doubt of should we or shouldn't we pursue this story. It was simply a question of how best can we do this reporting in a way that serves the public and adheres to our obligations to protect our source and to fulfill what we promised the source that we would do. And I don't think there are very many media institutions in the Western world that are both equipped with the resources and the staff necessary to do a story like this, as well as the institutional ethos to do it in a really unflinching and unhesitating way. And to see all that finally come to fruition from start to finish is also really gratifying. And I think it's a vindication of what we created The Intercept to set out to do. So there's one other important aspect of a vision that ended up being fulfilled by this story in a really unique way, and that was actually the vision that Edward Snowden had when he decided to disclose the information that he ended up disclosing. And there were a couple of controversial aspects to the whole Snowden story. There were actually numerous controversial aspects, but two in particular that are relevant to what I want to discuss, which is, you know, a lot of people said, why did he feel the need to identify himself? Why didn't he do what a lot of sources do and kind of conceal his identity and try and keep it a secret and hide? And another question was, why did it end up that there was so much focus on Edward Snowden, the person? Didn't that kind of distract from the substance of the revelations? Wasn't that kind of counterproductive? And the answer to both of those questions is actually the same. As you just heard from the essay that Ed wrote for this book, as very capably, dramatically interpreted by Peter. Snowden was not a person who acted in this kind of black hole. He was and saw himself as being one of this line, this lineage of really courageous whistleblowers. He was profoundly influenced by Daniel Ellsberg, by Chelsea Manning, by Tom Drake, by a whole variety of other people over the last 2 decades in particular, who risked their lives, risked their liberty, risked their careers for purely selfish ends. And had there not been a Daniel Ellsberg or a Chelsea Manning or a Tom Drake to influence Snowden and to spark his own sense of obligation as a citizen and as a person with access to this information, and to get him to think about what his duties are, and to get him to see the possibilities of what could be accomplished through this act of conscience, had it not been for any of them, there never would have been an Edward Snowden. These things wouldn't have occurred to him, or he wouldn't have been emboldened enough to do it. And so a big part of what he wanted to do in coming forward, and a big part of what I know Laura Poitras also thought was so critical in kind of pushing him into the spotlight, very much against his desires and instincts, was to contribute to this line and to create this model so that someone inside the government would end up hearing Edward Snowden talking about why he did what he did and how he has no regrets of any kind having done it. In fact, as he always says, my one regret when he's asked is, I would have done it earlier. I should have done it sooner. And so we wanted to make sure that there were people out there who had the benefit of hearing from him and about him the way that he got to hear about all of the people who preceded him and inspired him. And so to see now The Intercept get this story, the first huge story where we got it at the inception while The Intercept was up and running the way we envisioned, and to see that it was a very similar kind of pattern where somebody, through no expectation of self gain or material benefit, simply through an act of conscience, obviously aware of what Snowden had done, aware of what prior whistleblowers had done, literally risked everything of significance to all of us as human beings for no reason other than to make all of us aware of what we should have always been aware of, and what the concealment of which is a real threat to democracy and a complete disgrace, which is the fundamental questions of how our government is targeting whatever human beings it wants all over the world with no accountability and no due process for execution. And so I think that it's not just a fulfillment of the vision of Snowden, it's a fulfillment of The Intercept rather, but it's a fulfillment of the vision that Snowden had when he came forward. And I always felt like the most enduring part of the Snowden story was not going to be the specific revelations triggered by these particular documents that he turned over. I always felt like the more enduring consequence was going to be what it inspired all kinds of other people all over the world in the next 6 months, in the next 2 years, in the next decade, in the next several decades, what it would inspire them to do. And I think this is just one example of many of the kind of benefits we're going to continue to reap from Edward Snowden, way beyond the realm of the surveillance debate that he enabled us to have. So the last point I just want to make is a point about journalism more broadly and what I think is worth thinking about in terms of this story. One of the really fascinating aspects of how information is now stored is that it has gone from being stored on paper to being stored digitally. And there was an expectation on the part of factions that like to keep things secret, like governments and corporations and militaries, that this transformation of how information is stored would enable them to more efficiently keep things secret, would empower them to conceal information in large amounts from anyone that they didn't want to have it. And in some ways, that actually has happened. It is easier to secure information when it's on a thumb drive protected by encryption and multiple passwords and stored through all kinds of electronic barriers than if you just keep documents in a filing cabinet that are not that difficult physically to access. But in this really great karmic way, the people who created the system and had an expectation that would help them keep things secret have kind of created the weapons that are now most threatening to their ability to do so. If you talk to Daniel Ellsberg about his greatest challenge when it was time for him to leak the Pentagon Papers, his most difficult challenge was this really pedestrian, banal one, which is how do you leak 10,000 top secret documents to the New York Times without people knowing that you're doing that? Like, just physically, like logistically, how do you make a copy of 10,000 pages of top secret documents? Do you like go to the drugstore with this huge bag of dimes and like put it one by one into the Xerox machine in front of the pharmacist? That was his really big challenge, and it was a real impediment to getting these papers to the public. Now, if you look at how Chelsea Manning leaked her information to WikiLeaks, basically downloading huge amounts of data onto a tiny little thumb drive while she listened to Lady Gaga CDs to cover up what she was doing, you see how easy it is for this huge amounts of information to get out of the world's most potent power centers and into the public. And if you look at the biggest stories from all of the WikiLeaks releases to the recent Panama Papers, to things like the hack of Sony or the leaks that Anonymous did, and obviously the Snowden disclosures, this is going to be one of the most important means of how we learn about what the world's most powerful factions are doing through huge leaks of massive amounts of data that are now more easily transported and more difficult to detect than ever before. And so to be able to create a system that enables that and fosters that, I think is one of the most important challenges of journalism. And I'm so thrilled that we have a staff in place and the resources devoted to creating that so we can have many, many, many more Edward Snowdens and Chelsea Mannings and drone papers in the future. And I'm also really glad that we have journalists on our masthead, people like Cora and Ryan and Jeremy, who you'll hear from in a minute, who have the skill and, more importantly, the bravery and the commitment to what journalism is really about, which is not helping to conceal things, but helping to bring them to light. And you see the benefits when it works really well in the vast amount of light that we were finally able to shine on the Obama administration's worldwide assassination program. So with that, I thank you so much for coming tonight and for listening and for helping us celebrate the release of this book. Thanks so much.
Glenn Greenwald, everyone. My friends and colleagues used to think I was so annoying because I religiously read Glenn's blog at salon.com years ago. And it definitely influenced my worldview. And then now he has a Pulitzer. I think I've been vindicated. At least my tastes have. Okay, so a reminder for you that the books are on sale at The Intercept. Journalists later on will be signing those books, and that there are also a limited number of T-shirts made by The Intercept. Right now, MC Soul, DJ Payne 1, they're going to perform another song for you, and then we'll be hearing from Jeremy Scahill. So make sure that you stick around for that.
Thank you. I just want to say it's really crazy to get on stage after seeing Glenn Greenwald up there. I've been a student of Democracy Now!, been listening every day for probably 20 years. Listen to that show every day. So to say I'm like friends with Jeremy Scahill and I'm doing this is just a real honor to me because it's really important, Obviously you all know. So I'm not gonna blab about it, but I just wanna acknowledge what an important event that we're wrapping at tonight and how special it is. So thank you all for listening and coming out and participating in this event. Give it up for The Intercept one more time for this amazing book. We're gonna switch it up. This song's a love song. It's a love song. Hey liberals, you know I love you. I know you mean well, but let's get real. Let's get real. So you wanna make your white guilt go away? Why don't you go to Iraq, pledge no violence to the army? You call it charity, I call it a blowback. Look, for motherfuckers who don't know how NGOs spend money. You say we're agent provocateurs, you're worse, you're an agent moderator, an SEIU plant, a MoveOn.org front group for a bunch of Democrats. After yoga, you go downstairs to City O City, treat the servers like shit, you're a hypocrite. If we were in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was blowing shit up, you'd snitch him out. You say robbing a bank is such a serious crime. Got Stockholm Syndrome, ain't it time you got free? But do you know what free means? In the midst of World War Z, this ain't an anti-war song. It's the ballad of the bullet in the back from the people that brought you the 8-hour workday. They don't teach you that. Motherfucking high school history class. They always say cops represent the working class. A cop will stab you from your house and stab you in a speeding trap. Write you a ticket, then beat your ass. That shit ain't cool unless you're a liberal. I know it sounds like I'm being judgmental, but when you called those homeless people bums, that was judgmental, cowardly, classist, no sense of history. What you call it, a liberal. Obama stickers with the peace sign. Hillary Clinton with the peace sign. Bernie Sanders with the peace sign. Obama stickers with another drone strike in Yemen. This is going out to all the baby boomers and their bought and paid for unions. How you gonna talk shit? You know deep down you just wanna keep your home and the rest of the world out. Direct action gets the motherfucking goods. Pleading to power gets you nothing but the drones. You wanna hold the president's feet to the fire? I wanna set the White House on fire. Hey liberals, put on your latte. Pick up a Molotov cocktail. Hey liberals, shut up that damn NPR. Throw on some motherfucking stimulator. Get the bumper stickers off of your car. Get in the motherfucking streets with us. And you ain't gotta go to jail, but use your trust fund to throw down on some bail. All right, hey, that song's not directed at the crowd. It's just my critique of bourgeois liberalism. You know, we gotta, it's up to us, you know, we gotta put our bodies on the line like these brave whistleblowers do. That is the work of all of us to have that agency to fight back individually, personally, physically.
I'ma start a ride.
I'ma start a ride. What's up, Brooklyn? Are y'all ready to get turned up tonight? Make some noise if you're still alive. Brooklyn, what's up? How y'all feeling?
I'ma start a ride.
Yeah. This song is going out to all victims of police murder over the last decade, the last year, and everyone who's been resisting. Say Denver don't riot, Chicago don't riot. The control, demolition, or rage, far worse than the riot. Being at a rally with the chief of police. It ain't my definition of no justice, no peace. After all the gold talk, passed around a trash bag, collecting money for a civil suit. Even though there's a mile-long line of pro bono lawyers trying to do the jury. Something reeks in the Mile High City, got co-opted by police. In the Mile High City, only been there for a few years. It's still my city. If you ain't from the ruling class, the enemies, the quotes. I know Zimmerman will get it. Even if he walks, I've got that white privilege. I use it for what it's worth. Bring it to the face of corrupt ass cops and wannabe cops. Kill whoever they want when they get caught. All they get's a couple days off. Zimmerman is saying he carried out God's plan, cause God's a white racist. God is outdated. Preacher served the state. Don't talk to me about hate, it's all tough love. I know what side I'm on. They say Denver don't riot, Chicago don't riot. You could gun our mothers down, we still wouldn't riot. No justice, no peace. All I see is a fragile piece. They burned the Bill of Rights. We barely took the streets, so I'ma start a riot, I'ma start a riot. I'ma start a riot, I'ma start a riot. I'ma start a riot, I'ma start a riot.
I'ma start a ride. I'ma start
Gentrification sleeps. Black council members lead the war on 10,000 homeless folks who've got nowhere to sleep. Every city in America, suburbanized like Paris, so yuppies can ride their bikes to work and shop organic produce. Luckily, I'm broke as fuck where the people are. I'm living nice downtown. I'd be just as happy in Middleton. I'm a white radical, never on sabbatical. Wanna fight the power? It seems like they got to you. Never seen a riot. I've seen some riot cops. I don't cry for broken windows, cry for broken hearts, broken arms, broken promises. What a way of life here in the Republic, where your voice don't mean shit, only forces understood. We ain't asking, we telling. I ain't smoking what you selling. In Oakland they rebelling, in LA they shut it down. We sit there listening to preachers giving speeches. My message to the government, we're ungovernable. We don't want nothing from you. Stop all the murder from Pakistan to Florida, Guantanamo to Pelican Bay. Gotta say, motherfuck the USSA. No more class enemies. Cut the quarter, state the dollar. The American Legislative Exchange Council. These dumb white mother, shut your Facebook status. Talking about a race war. Ain't no race war, but the one that's been going on since 1492. What you think we got them jails for? What you think we got them fucking jails for? No white guilt here. It's how it is. But the opinions of these dumb cats make me sick. Take a deep breath. Inhale the tear gas. Feel streets quake. Beneath your feet as drones fly past. You wanna see change? It don't come from a court. It comes from the streets when we bring it to a home. Thank you. That's all we have for right now.
All right, guys, thank you so much. And as well as the books being sold back there, DJ Payne 1, MC Soul also have music back there that you can purchase too, so let me just mention that. Thank you so much for being here again tonight and sticking with us through the whole event thus far. And now I would like to introduce the final speaker here. This is someone that I'm fortunate enough to call my friend. And I keep using the word inspire. I'm so inspired by everybody. I really am truly inspired by this individual here. And if there's any kind of journalism or work that I would like to do, I just want to do what Jeremy Scahill does. What can I say? And so let me please introduce Jeremy Scahill. He is a co-founder of The Intercept. He's the author of Blackwater, Dirty Wars, journalist extraordinaire.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing this event with us. And, you know, I mean, I know that a lot of events that are done about very serious issues tend to attract a little bit of an older crowd. But I am so happy to see so many young people here tonight. So thank you to all of you young people who are taking your future so seriously that you want to pay attention to these issues. Except you. Okay, fine, you got some gray hair. All right, but I got some gray hair too. I just want to say something about our team at the Intercept. When we started this journey, we had a kind of surreal origin story, which is that Glenn Greenwald and I had started to talk about working on some stories together. Glenn at the time was at The Guardian. I was just finishing up the Dirty Wars project. I was writing for The Nation, but I was looking to do something a little bit different. Our friend and colleague Laura Poitras was also looking to try to do something that would build up independent media institutions. And I had never been to Brazil before, and I had met Glenn Greenwald once in person, and this was back in like 2013. We had communicated a lot. We had an open chat channel, but I had never really like hung out with Glenn Greenwald. And I had a story that I wanted to work on with him, and it required me going down to Brazil because Glenn had just been in Hong Kong meeting with Edward Snowden and obtaining the documents that now constitute the the Edward Snowden NSA documents, and I flew to Rio, not the worst place to have to go for work. After you've been in like Yemen and Somalia, it's like, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to go to Rio for this assignment. So I go down there, and Glenn and I are like, Glenn, first of all, Glenn lives like way up in the mountains. He's making fun of the 1960s, curtain behind him. Glenn had to go to a hotel tonight because he still does not have a good internet connection at his house. So Glenn had to like go down the mountain and go into a hotel with apparent 1960s curtains in order to do this event tonight. But I go there to I go there to Glenn's house, and it took me like 4 hours to get from the airport to Glenn's house because no taxi driver knew where it was. I go up there, and I enter the Glenn compound, and it was like Canine Planet of the Apes. There were like, a bazillion dogs barking. There were monkeys, actual monkeys, like in the trees, who were eating bananas, and then they would tease Glenn's dogs by like throwing banana peels at them. This is my introduction to the world of Glenn Greenwald. And then Glenn, and I guarantee you, Glenn was, I don't know why he wore a suit. Glenn's wearing a suit, and he has a tie on, and I guarantee you he has shorts on while he's sitting there. Glenn would be wearing, so I go there, I'm a little bit jet lagged, I had taken an overnight flight. Glenn is there, and he's sitting on his porch when I get up the next morning, and he's got like, flowered shorts on, flip-flops, and he's sitting there with a bag, it's like he called it his bag of goodies. He had a bag of all these encrypted drives with Edward Snowden files on them. He would carry, and this is the beginning stages of this. Glenn's partner, David Miranda, had just been detained at Heathrow Airport in London for 9+ hours, most of that without any access to a lawyer. And so, there was a very serious political context to what was happening with Glenn and David and Laura and Snowden. And I go there, and Glenn is like out on his porch. He's got like a bazillion dogs barking. He's drinking his coffee. He's wearing flowered shorts and flip-flops. And he's like, oh my God, you have to see all the documents that I found about this thing that we're working on. And so we were working on something that had to do with the Joint Special Operations Command and the assassination program, and how the NSA was monitoring and collecting metadata from cell phones around the world that could be used to track and whack people, as the CIA put it. And so Glenn and I, in this sort of weird Canine Planet of the Apes environment, start working on these stories. And while I'm down there, I was there for 10 days, while I'm down there on like day 4 or 5, Glenn gets an email from Trevor Timm, who is a great media freedom, privacy advocate, like wonderful guy, saying, I don't know if you've ever heard of this guy, but he's interested in starting a news organization, and he's interested in talking to you, and his name is Pierre Omidyar, and he was the founder of eBay. And then I think he put something in there like he's the 108th richest person in the world. And so, Glenn is like reading this email out loud to me, and he's like, do you think I should respond to this? And I'm like, maybe. Maybe, it's like we were at the time, we're talking about forming a news organization. So Glenn writes him back, and then in the midst of like me, Glenn, dogs, monkeys, banana peels, surfer shorts, flip-flops, targeted killing, end up sort of with this strange situation where this guy who's an extremely wealthy guy who is a big fan of Glenn's work because he was opposed to government intrusion on the privacy rights of Americans primarily, that was his gateway into it, is basically saying to Glenn, like, I'd like to start a news organization. I'd considered buying the Washington Post, but I'd rather just sort of build it from the, as one does, So anyway, that's a little vignette into this kind of crazy thing that happened where by the end of that, Glenn and I were like, okay, we're starting a news organization that's going to be funded by the dude who started eBay, who's like at this point, I think he's in the 50s, but like in the 100-and-something richest man in the world. And I was like, man, my parents are nurses. I lived at the Catholic Worker. I used to live in a homeless shelter. What am I doing with this guy? And the thing was, it was like a no-attached commitment to fund the journalism that we wanted to do. And so that was basically how all of this started. And we went through a whole mess, and we made mistakes and everything. But the point was that it started a process that created an ability to have an autonomous news organization where Pierre Omidyar, who funds this, never tells us what to do, what to write, what not to write. And we're, you know, so many journalists are fighting over how do you do this kind of journalism, and we feel very blessed to be in the position that we're in. And so we started what is now known as The Intercept, and we brought in people like Cora Currier, who spoke earlier tonight, favorite young journalists, and Ryan Devereaux, who I had worked with on Blackwater stuff, and Dirty Wars, and Murtaza Hussain, who was an amazing young journalist. And we started to build something, and we did it in a way where we didn't know exactly where we were going. But we got to the point, and we've gotten to the point now where we have an incredible editor-in-chief, Betsy Reed, who I had worked with for so long, who is an incredible leader. She's quiet, she's humble, but she is an incredible editor and has amazing insight into the kind of news that is not being done anywhere else. And we have this freedom to work on the stories that we're pursuing without regard to any hurdles that are thrown in our direction. And we have great lawyers working for us and others. But before I talk about the content of what we're here tonight about, which is the assassination complex, I want to say one thing. We are incredibly grateful to the individual who risked liberty, freedom, and their life to leak these documents to us. This is... We are living in a moment when a man who is in the White House right now is a constitutional lawyer by trade and training, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who was portrayed as a transformative figure in American politics, and is presiding over a global assassination program, is presiding over the most intense persecution and prosecution of whistleblowers in U.S. history, has used the Espionage Act more during his 2 terms in office than all of the presidencies in U.S. history combined since that act was signed into law in the early 1900s. This president, Obama, is viewed as this great liberal leader who had incredible support. And yet Dick Cheney, I imagine him fly fishing somewhere in Wyoming, having a good chuckle over how great this period has been for their agenda, for the agenda that John McCain would have never been able to implement, for the agenda that Mitt Romney would have never been able to implement. Barack Obama has used his credibility as a popular Democrat and a constitutional lawyer to seek to legitimize what amounts to a global assassination program. You know that every president since Gerald Ford has upheld an executive order that says that the United States does not assassinate people. And yet the US Congress has not only avoided legislating that issue or defining the term assassination, but has actively refused to do so. And the reason is because if Congress actually defined assassination, if Congress actually said, okay, that's an executive order, and we're now going to translate that into law, it would mean that you would have 500 plus lawmakers who would be also responsible for this policy. So instead of assassination, what we're told is that we're engaged in targeted killing. We're engaged in a high-value targeting campaign. No, no, no. What we are engaged in is a global hit squad program where we are the embodiment of what Richard Clarke, who was the counterterrorism czar under Clinton and then came over into the Bush era, he told Congress in a secret hearing shortly after 9/11 that the reason that Clinton didn't want to do all of the kinds of things that we're seeing right now is they didn't want to give the perception of running an Israeli-style assassination program. You fast forward to the present time, and we have a popular, liberal, democratic president who has basically said that it is legitimate for the United States to have a parallel judicial system whereby people are sentenced to death by a committee that meets on Terror Tuesday and puts people's terror statistics on what they call baseball cards, and it goes up the kill list chain of command, and at the top of that is the President of the United States, who acts in the spirit of an emperor and decides who will live and die on any given day because he says so. I want to know, with all the liberals who have supported this policy, and at one point it was 70% of self-described liberals said that they supported drone strikes abroad. I want to know how many of those people, when they hear the phrase President Donald Trump's kill list, are going to still believe in that principle. Because I'll tell you something, there's no such thing as a Democratic or Republican cruise missile. There's no such thing as a Democratic or Republican drone strike. Every nation in the world has a right to defend itself. That is not a question. And by nation, I would also include Native Americans in the United States. But every nation in the world has a right to defend itself. What we are engaged in right now, and I say we because if you pay taxes, you are a supporter of this. We are engaged not in defensive war. We're engaged in preemptive warfare, which was the Cheney Doctrine. And what President Obama has done, which will endure for generations to come, is he has made it possible for whoever the next president is, hawkish Hillary Clinton, the cruise missile liberal, or nutty as a fruitcake Donald Trump, who believes that Muslims shouldn't even be allowed to visit this country as tourists, whichever one of those two people ends up winning that election is going to be continuing these policies. And Bernie Sanders, by the way, and I'm sure there are people that are feeling the burn in this room tonight. And there's a lot of things that Bernie Sanders says that I think are really worth supporting. And it's unusual to hear the kinds of things on a national stage that he is saying. But the reality about Bernie Sanders is that when the groundwork was being laid for the future invasion of Iraq in the 1990s, Bernie Sanders supported legislation in 1998 called the Iraq Liberation Act, which made regime change in Iraq the law of the land. He endorsed a bill, supported it both publicly and with his signature, that was drafted by Donald Rumsfeld, who was not yet the defense secretary, William Kristol, the notorious, infamous neocon, Paul Wolfowitz, and others who brought you the invasion of Iraq. Bernie Sanders supported the legislation that they drafted in an early stage in the form of a letter to President Clinton that then laid the groundwork for the invasion of Iraq. Bernie Sanders then supported the most merciless regime of economic sanctions in modern history against the Iraqi people in an attempt to starve them into overthrowing the government of Saddam Hussein. It did not affect Saddam's regime. Instead, it killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. Bernie Sanders rightly blasts Hillary Clinton for being a regime change fan, and she is. She is as hawkish as they come. He blasts Hillary Clinton for her alliance with Henry Kissinger, and she should be blasted for that. But the fact is that we are not, as journalists, Democrats or Republicans. We have an obligation to hold anyone in power or seeking power accountable. And if you think Bernie Sanders' sheets are clean, they're not. Bernie Sanders was asked by Chris Hayes of MSNBC at the most recent Democratic town hall directly if he supports the kill list. And Bernie Sanders said, as it's currently being administered, yes, I do support it. Now, as it's currently being administered is laid out in this book. And this book, by the way, that we produce is a complete team effort of everyone, all of these investigative journalists that work with us on this book, that did the reporting on it. We pored over these documents and tried to present to people a counter narrative based on the government's own documents of what is happening around the world. What these documents show is that the Obama administration is relying on a system that depends on a mathematical formula for determining how many civilians are killed in these drone strikes that basically is guaranteed to almost always result in the number 0. So Obama is set to release their statistics on the number of people killed outside of declared war zones of Iraq and Afghanistan. And they're going to say that a minimal number of people have been killed. But what they're not going to tell you is that in many cases, they declare that anyone killed in drone strikes is an enemy killed in action, EKIA, until or unless posthumously proven to have not been. So it's sort of turning the idea of due process in a very gruesome, lethal way on its head. This kind of reporting that we are doing at The Intercept is the result of an incredible team effort of fact checkers and lawyers, and we have an incredible design team of people who try to visualize the data so that it can be shared and digested and understood. But there's one person that I want to point out in particular, and that is my amazing colleague, Roger Hodge, who was the former editor-in-chief of Harper's Magazine. Roger edited this book, and he did it on his own time in addition to being full-time at The Intercept. So I just want to thank Roger Hodge for all the work that he did on this. And the final thing I want to say is that we are living in a time and in a moment when there is a war against independent journalism. There is a war against independent journalism in the form of the targeting of whistleblowers. There is a war against independent journalism in the targeting of journalists' phone records and surveilling their communications. This administration, which claimed to be ushering in the era of the most transparent administration in US history, has sent a message to those in government who want to blow the whistle on government misconduct, unconstitutional activity, extrajudicial killing, that we will pursue you to the end of the earth. And what that means is that when things like the killing of Osama bin Laden happen, John Brennan can leak like a sieve and tell everyone lies about a wife being put in front of bin Laden and a shootout happening and all of the other stuff that they said. Those are official leaks. Those are acceptable. When David Petraeus wants to leak or share classified information to make himself look like Superman in front of his mistress, that's acceptable. Hillary Clinton's emails, that would be an utter scandal if it was a private citizen who was doing that because of reasons of conscience. Some government contractor who said, well, I want to have classified email material sent to my personal email address. Those people would be going down on espionage charges right now. Instead, she may be the next president of the United States. The fact is that we live in a society where so many people that are at the bottom of the chain of command are the ones standing up. Chelsea Manning was sentenced to 30 years in a military prison because she blew the whistle on war crimes. You just watch one thing, and that was the collateral murder video, where Iraqi civilians and Reuters journalists were gunned down to applause and laughter by members of the United States military. The idea that Chelsea Manning is serving 30 years in prison for exposing that and other misdeeds and illegal activity by the US government, and David Petraeus is a professor somewhere, and William McCraven is a professor somewhere. He's the head of the entire University of Texas educational system right now, former commander of JSOC, who tried to give sheep to Afghan villagers to apologize for killing their loved ones and digging bullets out of the bodies of pregnant women. The idea that we live in a society where it's up to the young people, the lower command people, to blow the whistle, and those in power cover it up or share classified information because they want to sleep with someone, that's a sick commentary on our society. I'm going to end the chat part of this evening by saying this. What we're trying to do at The Intercept is flawed, and we're open to criticism, and we listen to people who weigh in and have something critical to say about us. We are not arrogant about what we're doing. We are trying to build something different. We're seeking different ways to fund journalism. I've been at the other end of this, where you spend 3 months of your year begging for funding, begging for finance, trying to convince people that what you're doing is worth something. And we're not perfect. But what we're trying to do is to create an independent media organization that people, when they come to our site or they come to our work, they know where we're coming from. The notion of objectivity is total bullshit. The New York Times is not objective. The New York Times is an advocacy publication. CNN is not objective. It is an advocacy network. It's an advocate for the way things are in the view of the state. We don't want to go to the White House Correspondents Association dinner. We want to dwell with people like you. We want to dwell with people who live on the other end of the barrel of the gun. And the last thing I'll say is this. I want to dedicate this entire evening, and I hope all of you keep this in your hearts and minds when you leave here today, to all of those whistleblowers, known and unknown, who risk life and liberty to tell us stories that we wouldn't hear otherwise. Those are the true heroes in our society. Thank you very much.